Hi and welcome to my first ever YouTube tutorial. In this video I want to show you how I set up the isometric grid in Procreate, build a 3D letter from scratch and how I style it. Also I will share some tips and hacks along the way. After this tutorial you will know how to create 3D letters in different kind of perspectives, like this one, this, or you can try out more complex compositions like my interlock Tetris lettering from Lettering Star Challenge last year. To get started, I need to set up the isometric grid. For that I go into Actions, Canvas and tap on Drawing Guides. Now I go into the Drawing Guide settings. You will end up in the 2D grid by default, but I want to go straight to isometric. Because my background color is pretty dark, I can't see any drawing guides, so I'm going to change that by choosing a color from the top bar. At the bottom you can see settings for opacity. I will just stick to around 30. You can take away or add thickness to your lines, and you can change your grid size. Just tap, even change your unit, and I'm going to go with 150. There's also assisted drawing, which comes in really handy, but I'm going to save that for later. For sketching, I'm choosing white color and the 6B pencil from Procreate's default sketching set. And my brush is on size 20. If you know how to draw perspective objects, you can of course start instantly with shaping your letter. But if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, here's a trick. I'm going to draw the letter S in a very straight and geometric style. This doesn't have to be perfect, but it's good if you don't have any curves in this. So now I go into Transform, Distort, and now I'm able to move the corner points. And what I want to do is set each corner point on one of these lines. And what is important is that these lines are on the same guide. So this is not going to be perfect, but that's totally fine. Something that you should consider now is how big you want your line to be. And with line, I'm not referring to the sketch, but how big this boxed front is going to be. I'm deciding that I want each of my boxes to be 2 by 2, so this is a little bit too wide. So what I'm going to do is just making my letter a little bit smaller. Now that this is done, I'm going to create my boxes. And something that's important is that the space between two lines is equal. So the space also needs to be 2 by 2, which does not work here, but I'm just going to delete this line by selecting it, going onto the layer and just click clear. And now I can redraw this part. So now that my letter is shaped, I'm going to add a shadow. And for that, I'm going into the opposite direction. I know that I want my shadow to be 2 by 2 as well. So what I need to do is go to each of these corner points where 2 or more lines meet and just create another 2 by 2 line. Let me just shade the front part so we know what we are working with. Next step is the outlines, and for that I'm going to lower my opacity, and I'm also renaming my layer to Sketch. I'm creating a new layer called Outlines for obvious reason, and let me make this a little bit more subtle. For the outline I'm going to use a light blue color and the monoline brush from the calligraphy set on size 3. And what I'm going to do is now recreate the lines of my sketch, but now I need to stay on the guides. And for that I'm going back into the drawing guide settings and activate assisted drawing. Procreate makes your active layer assisted, but if you would want assisted drawing to be applied to another layer, you can just activate this as well by tapping once and select assisted drawing. So now what I'm going to do is check the nearest point, hold, and drag my line. And because this is assisted drawing, every stroke is on the right perspective. As you can see, I did not end up perfectly on this knot, but that's totally fine. We're not aiming for perfection. The outline is done. Let's check if I missed anything, because no matter how often I do this, I always miss a line. So this one is not that pretty. Something that can be really annoying about Drawing Assist is that the eraser also applies to the guides. What I'm gonna do is just pause my assisted drawing because I don't need it on this layer anymore. And then I can just clean this one. Now that the outline is done, let's fill this up. And here's another trick. Of course, I could just copy this layer 2 times and fill it with the background color and the front color, but I'm going to use a different technique. I'm going to make this layer a reference layer and put 2 layers below. This one I call front, and the second one I call shadow. Now I'm going to choose a slightly darker shade of blue to fill the front. And because my outline is the reference, front and shadow layers consider the outline itself. So all I have to do is fill up each box with the right color. For the shadow, I use the same color as my background, which doesn't make sense right now, but it will later. Now let's check this up here. Looks great. Let's add some fancy effects. For that, I'm going to the front layer, add a new layer on top, and make it a clipping mask. Then I tap on front again and add another layer, which automatically becomes a clipping mask. I will call the bottom one shading and set it to multiply. And I will call the top one highlights and change the blending mode to add. Because I need shading and highlights for the shadow as well, I'm just going to duplicate these layers, select them and move them to my shadow. I'm starting with the shading of my front part of the letter. So far, I've only used Procreate default brushes to make this tutorial as accessible as possible. But honestly, when it comes to shading or grainy effects, Procreate doesn't really have great brushes for that. So for this tutorial, I created my first grain brush that is called Compress Grain, and that you can get for free in the description below. If you want to use an Procreate alternative, I suggest you try the Spray Paint's medium nozzle. But I'm going to use the freebie brush. For the shadow, I'm going to use the same color as the front part of the letter on a 85% brush. With the shadow, I want to add more dimension to my letter. For that, I'm choosing the bottom right corner and I add more pressure in the corner and less towards the center. As you can see, I have overdrawn here a little, which is not a problem at all. But to make sure I don't do this again, I'm going to select each box to be more on point. I will just lower the opacity a bit so it doesn't come off too strong. Now I'm going to do the same on the highlights layer, but This time I'm going to emphasize the top left corner. Also, I'm going to focus more towards the center. Before I go over to the shadow, I'm going to give the outlines a little bit more depth. And for that, I'm going to use the background color and the color of the shadow. And I'm going to create a clipping mask on the outline that I call shading. Now what I'm going to do is only color the back of my outline. Now I'm going to add some highlights to my shadow. For that, I'm going to use the shadow color as well on my highlights layer that is set to add. And because my light on the front part is coming from over here, I will add my highlights on the shadow at the same edge. And for the shadow, I'm going to do the exact same on the opposite side. So now let's add some finishing touches. For that, I'm going to create a new layer on top, set it to add, and I'm going to call it highlights. As for the brush, I'm going to luminance and choose the light pen on size 60% and opacity also around 60%. Now this brush needs a little bit of practice sometimes. If you use less pressure and add more, you can create this kind of light effect. Or you can start by adding more and going to less. Totally up to you. So what I'm going to do now is tilt my drawing because I'm better at drawing this way. I eyeball the center of my line and try to use as less pressure as possible and go with more towards the corner. This line doesn't have to be perfect, and if you feel like you messed up, you can tap on Edit Line and move this where you want it to go. Now I'm going to do the same here. Less pressure and add more and connect these lines. And I'm going to do the same over here. If you feel like you did not do a good job, you can go to the eraser and use the compress brush or any grain brush and just slightly go over this edge and feather it out. Now I'm going to lower my brush size and opacity and go slightly over this back line by adding less pressure, a little bit more and less again. to add even more sparkles, you can add another add layer, and you can go into the luminance set and choose flare. And this is basically how you create a block letter in Procreate using the isometric grid. And if you want to try the grain brush I use for shadows and highlights, it comes with a free step-by-step guide that you can use in Procreate, and you will find the link in the description below. I hope I could show you something new, and if you're trying this out and posting it on social media, please tag me so I can see what you created.